Welcome and thanks a lot for joining us for today's webinar. The webinar today will be dedicated to the evolving world of English language proficiency testing. And personally, I'm very pleased that we were able to put this panel of experts together for you today, because we're going to be discussing the evolution of this crucial aspect of many students' study abroad journeys. And already in the brief meetups that we've had putting together this webinar, this group has made me appreciate how all of this relates to student recruitment and to accessibility of education and ultimately to student success. So I think we have a great conversation in store for you for the coming perhaps 1 hour or so. Now, some very quick introductions. Joining me today are Lindsay Addington. She's the Senior Strategic Engagement Executive at the Duolingo English Test. Peter Vermeulen, he's the Director of International Recruitment at the University of North Texas. Hello, Peter. And Banit Soni is the CEO of Imperial Overseas Education Consultants. And I'm Ian Can, Director for the Americas at ICEF, and I'm your host and asking some questions today. Thank you so much to all the panelists for taking the time. Excuse the very brief introductions, but please feel free to talk more about yourselves and your experience if you wish, whenever you have the opportunity during our conversation. So these are the topics we will try to cover today, and for each of these sections, we will start with either a statement or a question to kick off the conversation. We'll be looking at the global trends that influence digital English testing, how accessibility of English testing benefits everyone in the industry, and we ask how reliable and secure at-home testing can be, and explore whether English testing can even be an enrollment tool. And at the end, we'll try to address any questions that have come up, and then we'll make some closing thoughts. So before we do all that, I would like to start now by launching a quick poll, and this poll will let us know who's in the audience today, and it should be on your screens more or less now. Your answers to this will be useful in how we shape this discussion, so please answer honestly, and I'll leave that there on your screens now for a few minutes. Now, allow me to set the scene a little bit for our discussion today, because I think it's important to understand where we've come from and certainly where we're headed, because English language proficiency certainly opens doors for many, many people, yet traditional proficiency testing still stands in the way for many students. And traditional English testing models are probably what many of us think about when we talk about English proficiency testing. They're largely in-person, center-based exams. They are inflexible, they're expensive, they're possibly difficult or maybe even impossible to get to. And as such, these traditional testing methods have created roadblocks for many students. And all of this has been made even more acute by the global pandemic and other recent geopolitical events. So as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. And what will come out throughout this conversation, no doubt, is how accessible, reliable, and secure digital testing has not just proved easier, but has actually proved necessary to meet the needs of international students and institutions during these challenging times that we've faced. On top of that, we'll see that digital at-home testing, which was once simply seen as a disruptive force in the field, is now very much the new normal, and it will continue to innovate and reinvent itself as it strives to meet the constantly evolving English proficiency testing needs of future students and of institutions. Okay, so time now to look at the results of our first poll, and thank you. Here are those results. So we have predominantly education providers, about a third service providers, about 15% recruitment agents, and 10% or so other. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. That's very useful for us, but I think for the panel, it's generally quite a nice mix of all types. So let's start by talking about accessibility. And Banit, if I can come to you first. The statement here is that affordable and on-demand testing benefits students, agents, and institutions. And I was wondering whether you agree with that, and whether, or I should say, how the testing landscape has looked in India and specifically in your region in Mumbai over the last couple of years, and how that's changed over the last couple of years. Could you give us your insights a bit on that?
Absolutely, Ian. So obviously the pandemic itself was, unwarranted. In terms of any government, India as well responded by putting in barriers of, in terms of social distancing, barriers in terms of accessibility, barriers in terms of, various aspects which kind of disrupted the English proficiency testing and the way it is done. In most circumstances, like in 10 years in the industry, and in most of the circumstances, it would be the parent going on, arriving at a particular time at the test center, maybe a 15-20 minutes gestation period, sit on the chair, and the test would start at that particular time and, and that frame. Now, what has happened because of certain things? One, the difficulty in moving around. So India locked down somewhere near mid-March, and it remained in total lockdown till about October. A few relaxations were in place, but the Omicron variant showed its face. Again, it went down into a month and a half of lockdown. In fact, visas were an issue. Proficiency, English testing was an issue. Getting transcripts for students was an issue. So everything, these roadblocks created a lot of problems. And in this part of it, Duolingo being the way it is, I would say at least 30 to 40% of the students, chose this test. The universities accepted this test, and they moved ahead and were able to successfully, put in their applications on time, get their visas on time, and kind of move ahead, when the borders opened. Because otherwise, this whole thing would have been kind of bottleneck and strained in terms of the first part, in terms of, say, the difficulty in getting it. The second thing, which I would say, is India is a very price conscious market. So in terms of price, we are from the lower middle kind of tier in terms of, and most of the students who come to us, yes, there are a few obviously rich business families, but most of them are price conscious. So compared to other exams, the Duolingo is at about 4,000 rupees, which is very, very convenient, and especially during the time of COVID, because majority of the Indians were on, obviously we didn't get the same kind of, we got government help, but not at par with the European nation. We were, most salaries were reduced and part of it, versus others which are at about 15,000 odd rupees. So that was the second in terms of the expensiveness of the test, which was there. And add to that about the time. So in terms of time, the slot availability during the last 2 years has been very bad. In fact, it's been over a month, 2 months, students have to wait for a slot. Availabilities were overnight rules were changed, because every, district or locality, after the first 3-4 months, every district or locality in India were given their rights to manage the COVID-19 by themselves. So in fact, what happened is, if the cases would rise, they would immediately shut down or close say they would make it a curfew, control the time frame. So all of that vagaries were there. So if suppose I am a student and I have booked a certain date, right, in any of the testing centers, on that day or 3 days before, there is a certain spike in COVID-19. I miss the test, and there is no issue of, the problem of rescheduling was quite bad. So that's one thing. And even for the example, getting the test results. Now, the very important aspect of getting the test results is that everybody wants it fast. So we want the test, as soon as the test is given, the test results were taking time to come. Official score reporting was taking time to come. In fact, that's how in terms of Duolingo, the kind of these things comes out in about 3-4 hours. The official score repeating is free, so unlimited, and there were also changes of universities, etc. So these are the few aspects which I would say created, and in terms of how this whole system evolved. And I can personally tell you that after the pandemic, I can say our students have become more digital savvy. I mean, we are already talking about millennial, whatever XYZ they call them, whatever Gen Z or whichever one generation you can think of. But these guys or these girls are so tech savvy in terms of, ability, in terms of way they want to function, the way they research, the way they want to do it. And they are also lazy, I would say. This generation is one of the most laziest. So,
Yeah.
so they don't want to go to they don't want everything on, at their house. They want the offer letters to come on emails, no courier, no nothing. The visas to be done, on paper. So yeah, but that's what it is. I mean, we are evolving into a digital generation, and we have to move with the times. It's not that in my time, I still remember writing sending envelopes to universities and all of that, and getting physical copies of report card, of those test results. I think that's all gone now.
Yeah, we've come a long way. So, I mean, Banit, it's fair to say then that for you, digital English testing is here to stay, and you'd say that for your students as well. It's we're not going to go back to where we were before.
No, not at all. In fact, the acceptability of digital testing in terms of the students, the on-demand, the kind of the way it's like, okay, so I'm just simple, like Netflix, for example. Netflix has overtaken HBO and Star Movies and blah blah blah, all of those channels combinedly, right? So this generation wants the preparation as and when they do. This generation wants acceptability to be instantaneous, results to be out fast. If they need to repeat the test, say for example, if something goes bad in the test, something you're not feeling well, some things which are not up to the mark, or something where you goofed up, right? So, but this generation wants to repeat it fast, and they don't want to miss deadlines, right? And and certain universities have priority deadlines which are savvy for scholarships. Okay, they have certain priority deadlines which give you application fee waivers. There are certain deadlines which you get in-state tuition, out-state tuition. You will know the state of Texas. So those deadlines, in order to hit those deadlines on time and be fully prepared, I think digital on-demand testing is definitely here to stay.
Thanks, Bennett. I would like to launch another poll quickly while we keep talking, and this poll asks the audience how comfortable your students are with the idea of digital testing. And Bennett is here from a large agency in Mumbai, and he's clearly very much in favor of digital English testing. But it would be nice to see if the audience agrees with that. So let's have a look at that right now. And then, Bennett, if I can just ask you one follow-up question. In your experience using digital English testing so far, are there any areas where you would like to see it improve in the service that it offers you and your students?
So not much. I mean, we've already, in terms of security, in terms of the way it is done, we are actually at the level wherein we are able to monitor them, regulate them, see them, timeline with them, and the algorithms written for underlying this testing are pretty robust. So it definitely, in terms of the reliability of the test, the kind of scores, the repeated scores which student take, out of my experience, I can say that it's similar. I mean, see, the person can mess up a test, but like we do all these trainings, right? English proficiency test, all of them. So we know what level the student is at, and we kind of understand that at the level which they are, that's the level which they're performing at. So the reliability is definitely there in terms of we don't see too much variation in that. So that's the best part of the test. So if we have trained a student for English proficiency, and he's at a particular English level, and all the English proficiency tests and whatever levels they have are pretty similar, right? So they have pretty screening points of universities are adapted. Peter would obviously vouch for that. They know the cutoff points with every test. So every test has the level at which the student kind of benchmarks itself, and which is used for the visa purpose, which is used for admission purpose, which may be used even for scholarship purposes. So that benchmark is well maintained, and I don't see student, too many vagaries on that. And even now, for example, even off the pandemic, currently also, it is taking about 15 days to book a test center with other competitive English proficiency test. At this stage also, during the pandemic was 1 or 2 months, but right now it takes 15 days to book a test center. Then it takes 7 to 10 days to get the result, which means you're already a month down. Now the situation is, and Peter and all the universities would agree, universities are closing deadlines fast because they are getting filled up. The seats, all the official deadline is say 15th of April or 1st of May, but we are getting mailers. Everything is full. Kindly send students for next intake. So now in this scenario, it is imperative for us to push the student towards online and immediate testing, because if he has to apply for this intake, he has to do it now. And that's a savior. That's like the golden spoon.
Great. Well, thanks, Banit. I think I have just clicked share on the poll results there. So hopefully you're seeing those now. And I think most people, almost 2/3, saying that they're very comfortable with digital English, or their students are very comfortable with digital English assessments, and the rest are somewhat comfortable, and very few actually not at all comfortable. So moving on, let's take a look at the next question or statement. This one says, and I think this would probably be a very common question for people who are new to the concept of at-home digital testing, because it certainly was mine, but that obvious question is, how reliable and secure can at-home testing really be? And to provide an answer to this one, I'm going to come to Lindsay from the Duolingo test of English now. Lindsay, the test describes itself as digital first, using human in the loop artificial intelligence. And can you explain what that means, and perhaps more importantly, how this is able to create a test of English that can be reliable and used for high stakes admissions decisions?
Great. Thank you, Ian, and thanks to ISEF for hosting us today. And it's always great to hear from those on the ground supporting students that from their perspective, it is reliable. Always appreciate hearing that. So from its inception, the Duolingo English test has been a digital exam, and that's distinguished from, for example, tests that started as paper-based tests that then became computer and then internet-based tests. So digital first is from its inception. We have used technology and artificial intelligence from end to end. So from test development to test proctoring to test security to test scoring, artificial intelligence has played a role and plays a role in the design, development, administration process with humans along for every step of the way. And so being that there is a review component and interaction between technology and humans from design to administration. And so I think what makes this a reliable exam is that the test development is backed by research. But because of the innovative approach, because of being a digital first assessment, there wasn't necessarily a framework that existed currently. And so our assessment scientists developed such a framework. And we'll be happy to share that kind of theoretical ecosystem that the Duolingo English test operates in. But the old guidelines, right, designed for traditional English language proficiency tests did not fit this new model. And so in our ecosystem that kind of builds that reliability and the validity and frames the user experience, we ensure that it is accurately assessing and reporting the test taker's English language proficiency, and that it is a reliable test for use in high stakes admissions testing. I think it's important to note, though, that while it is an innovative assessment, being that it is digital first, on demand, at home, accessible, that it is calibrated to the internationally recognized benchmark for language learning, which is the Common European Framework for Reference, and that our research has also supported, as Bennett suggested, its strong correlation with the more traditional English proficiency tests of IELTS and TOEFL. I think another important feature and quality of the Duolingo English test is what we refer to as AQUA, which stands for the Analytics for Quality, Assurance, and Assessment. And similar to the theoretical ecosystem not being fit for this new innovative model, quality assurance frameworks and standards did not fit kind of this fully digital assessment. And so Duolingo English test custom built this quality assurance system, which continuously monitors the metrics and the trends and the test scores and user data to ensure that everything is reliable. And that's to compare it again to traditional models where we are no longer a single form exam kind of being administered on a set date and time. And right, so we need to continually endlessly be monitoring because there are people taking the test every minute of every day, right? And so these things are evolving and necessary to ensure that these new forms of assessment are holding up to standards, reliability standards. I think you mentioned security, right? Security is a critical piece of the reliability conversation. Ensuring that the test taker is who they say they are, and avoiding ensuring that cheating does not go undetected. And we have numerous features of the Duolingo English test that ensure that the security is at a high standard. I think one of the things that Bennett might have mentioned, though, is the short nature of the test. It is a test that's done in under an hour, right? And so that helps, again, with the accessibility component. It helps with those who may have internet connectivity challenges, but keeping it under an hour is a critical piece of the Duolingo English test. And we're able to do that through being a computer adaptive exam. So we are meeting the student at their proficiency level and providing questions at their level to more quickly and more efficiently get to their reliable score of English proficiency. And one of the reasons that we can do that is because we have a large item bank of questions that feed into this computer adaptive section of the exam. That's one way that we're able to keep it secure. And again, not really worried about item exposure, but something that through our systems, our analytical systems, are able to track item exposure and make adjustments where needed. There are no supply chain risks, dissimilar to kind of a test center-based model where materials are being shipped or produced locally. And again, we utilize artificial intelligence and machine learning to flag certain things for us. And I will, Ian, just share my screen briefly. I have a graphic that I think depicts well.
Please do.
I think just visually, right, this can really help someone understand some of the differences between a traditional model and the Duolingo English test, which is kind of that on-demand at-home test. So typically when we talk about a test center-based model, you have one proctor, typically with 25 test takers, whereas in our model, that ratio flips quite significantly in that we have 2 to 3 proctors to 1 test taker. And the asynchronous model of the Duolingo English test, right, facilitates that. So we have additional security features and security advantages because we have recorded images and recorded video, using kind of all of the AI, the biometrics, the statistics, the computer vision that is also analyzing the test taker. And this is also where we go back to human in the loop, right? So after an exam is proctored, for example, it is first gone through an artificial intelligence proctoring process that's flagging certain things, environmental and behavioral factors that then the proctors review in independent proctored review processes. I think just one other, and I'll stop sharing. I think the other security features, again, being that it is a desktop app, so it is secure, it is full screen. There are ways to detect multiple screens. There are ways to detect other software running, and all of the onboarding procedures and all of our resources to help students prepare for the Duolingo English test are going to ensure that they feel ready to kind of showcase their real English language proficiency, being supported perhaps by counselors such as Vanna and his staff and others that are helping students kind of familiarize themselves with the type of digital assessment that this is.
Thanks, Izzy. It all sounds very technologically advanced. I wonder, with that in mind, it sounds almost, it sounds futuristic, but how can you imagine that you'll be evolving this going forward as the world changes and as students' needs change? Do you already have an idea of where this is going next?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages of being a digital first test and not also having, for example, a paper-based test to accompany this digital model and method of exam is that we are able to really be innovative and quickly so, right? We're able to adjust and adapt As input comes in, both from the users of the test takers themselves, the institutions that we partner with who are using the scores for high stakes decisions, and as research and new innovative technologies evolve, right? An example of a latest, so we were a test that was developed and launched in 2016, but we added a new feature in 2020 around subscores, right? To better understand the nuance of one's English language proficiency. And this was another innovative approach for the industry, right? In presenting subscores as integrated modalities, not in the standard speaking, reading, writing, and listening scores that other language proficiency test providers provide in terms of a nuanced understanding of one's proficiency. But I'm excited kind of in the timing of this webinar in that we just launched in February, and again 2 days ago, new features of the test. So in February, we started scoring the extended writing sample of the test. And this was done to increase the amount of scored writing and academic content and score reliability while maintaining a shorter test under 1 hour. So we've been able to use kind of the same scoring techniques on longer form writing that now add to kind of increased score reliability. And that's an adjustment we were able to make thanks to technology and our expert human reviewers. The second new addition that we just launched 2 days ago, so you've probably seen a lot of social media posts around this new item, is our interactive reading item. And this, like the scored writing for reading, right? This increases the amount of scored reading, the amount of academic content, and score reliability using cutting edge item generation techniques. And so with the latest machine learning technology to automatically generate test content, it's called GPT-3 if you're interested in learning more about this, but this machine learning model is able to mimic text and provide us what we need to have new features on the exam that more mirror what a student is experiencing in the classroom, outside of the classroom, highlighting text, summarizing, providing a title to a passage, filling in missed elements of the passage. And so I think we are going to continue to evaluate what we are able to do and produce through a short, accessible English proficiency test based on what the new technology is providing.
Thank you, Lindsay. I just wanted to say that we're seeing lots of Q&A coming in already, but I did fail to mention at the beginning, if anyone has any questions that they'd like answered about Duolingo tests or anything related, please do put them in the Q&A and we'll do our best to get to them either by text or at the end of this webinar if we have time. Moving on now, our next question is English testing. How can English testing be an enrollment tool? And Peter, in your line of work at the University of North Texas, I'm sure you couldn't fail to have noticed that international student mobility has decreased dramatically as a result of the last 2 years pandemic. But we are starting to see it rebound a little now, or quite well, actually. What strategies have you utilized to maintain or grow even and diversify your pipeline of international students during this time? And have there been any stories you'd like to share about any particular shifts at University of North Texas over this time?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Ian, and delightful to be with the ISEF team here on a really topical webinar. Great to see you, Banet, as well, a wonderful partner of the University of North Texas in India. I get to be with Banet in 2 weeks' time, actually, in Mumbai. So regarding your question for enrollment, the University of North Texas was an early adopter of the Duolingo English test. It was key for what was then our largest pool of talent, the Chinese market. So I came to learn about the Duolingo English test through Andrew Chen, actually, at Horan in Pittsburgh, a neighbor of Duolingo, right, in Pittsburgh. And the reason why we were an early adopter for the test is this. China, of course, has a huge geography, right? And travel distances are just off the scale. And so traditionally in China, it was already quite a challenge for students to get from wherever they were to the few English language testing facilities that there were in the country. And so that was one of the key reasons why we looked for this digital option. The other one is that in a country like China, the academic year, the academic calendar runs late, meaning they do their national university entrance exam around June. They get the results in July. And for most of the schools like ours, public universities in the US, this is very late in our recruitment cycle. And when actually some of our deadlines have either already expired or are really closing up fast. And for that reason, it really was helpful for us to, when students heard in China about their Gaokao scores and perhaps did just not get into the university back home where they had hoped to get in, but were still really well qualified applicants, we could offer them a plan B to come study in the US. But we, of course, needed a very quick turnaround in terms of getting them an English language score. And so Duolingo was able to provide us that on the spot, digitally, with results in 2 or 3 days, through which we could do very last minute admission to that important talent pool. And so this was actually pre-COVID. And so that back then was a key reason why we adopted Duolingo English test. In addition to that, and Banet's already mentioned this, there is the price consciousness in several markets. And each school in the US is geared a little bit different, but of course the way that international students come to us is very much through referral, right? No one wakes up halfway around the world and thinks, oh, I'm going to study and spend the family fortune in Denton, Texas. Right? So there's people that refer the student to your institution, and they tend to be the aunties and uncles in the large diaspora communities that live right on our doorstep. And in Dallas-Fort Worth, these are Vietnamese communities, Nepali communities, where the means to send the students to study in the US may be a little bit limited. And so price consciousness of testing is a key element in their countries for them being able to afford these tests. And so that was another reason why for us in markets like Vietnam, Nepal, the Duolingo test has been a wonderful enabler of a larger applicant pool.
Thanks, Peter. Now, I remember when we were preparing for this discussion, you did share your perspective on how we should already be beyond talking about disruption as we talk about digital English testing. Can you elaborate on what you said about the new world being a world of AI that we should all be embracing?
Yeah, and I'm by no means an expert on any of this, but let me share a perspective. I think most of us are aware that, especially with the pandemic has really kind of accelerated the adoption of digital technologies, where, and Ian, I can't quote you, you had a brilliant sentence there at the beginning where you said the necessity drove this, right? And that's absolutely right. Large public schools like mine being somewhat of a slow-moving organism, we've done our bit to get our minds around what does all this new technology mean? How can we adopt it effectively? You know, in the US, the admissions role is distributed among the 4,000 universities. Each have their own admissions offices and have some pretty traditional processes through which we assess if a student is ready to join us. And I think what AI is making possible, not just in the English language realm, but also in the realm of transcript evaluation, authentication of credentials, all of that, is that some of this can be done much better by a machine than by a human, quicker for sure. And so what I expect that we will see as AI spreads more and quickly in the next couple of years is that some of those parts of the admissions roles at institutions around the world will be taken over by AI and organizations that use AI to intermediate this. So where I think it's going, and where we're seeing some of the first signs of that, is that the space between applicants and institutions is being intermediated by platforms and providers who perhaps will be structuring something that'll look more like an auction where institutions will bid on students that are well qualified, and well qualified students will bid on places at institutions based perhaps on the financial package and things like that. And so some sort of a digital intermediation, I think, is inevitable. And I'm delighted with the product that Duolingo offers, because refreshingly, a lot of the features are to the benefit of the student, which I know we should be into, right? And so that's fantastic that some of those features, Ian talked earlier about access, the cost of the test, the speed of turnaround, the ability to retake if you screw up, those kind of things are really very valuable and of value to the student.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Barnett, I see you nodding. You obviously agree with that as well. Yeah, so we'll just have to trust the robots, trust the AI. As long as we trust them, then everything will be fine.
Well, trust and keep the humans involved. I do like that check, which Duolingo also understands, that this is not the bots running wild.
Right.
Okay. Well, I think it's just a conversation and a balance of where best to use humans, where they're best, and where best to use machines, and finding that delicate balance and more efficiently using each.
Indeed.
Absolutely. I mean, connecting universities where algorithms are involved and connecting humans where emotions are involved, right? So that aspect of it is where even in terms of the overseas education space, you can Duolingo accessibility, speed, all as using machines or the AIs in place which are helping expedite. And obviously the human aspect in terms of the repeatability of the test, the kind of in terms of accessibility or the kind of monitoring you can have, the kind of level of, like I told you, like when we train for English proficiency, the same level kicks in. So those are tests which humans can understand, and you can say that the level is, as Duolingo, is very reliable and perfect in terms of what accuracy or English proficiency test.
Thanks, Barnett. So I think we're heading into our Q&A. We certainly have a few questions ready, but before we get there, I think we have time for our last poll here. This one's interesting as we look to determine how digital English testing is perceived by the audience, especially having sat through most of this webinar. So that poll is now on your screens, so please answer in your own time. We can perhaps compare that to the first poll that we did as well. We'll come back to look at the results of that. In the meantime, let me ask a question here to Lindsay. Now, Lindsay, other English proficiency test providers have offered alternative ways to take their tests as a result of the test center closures that they faced recently. Now, some of those are no longer being offered or have only been temporarily accepted by certain universities. How do Duolingo test users know or trust that the Duolingo English test will be continue to be accepted in the future as we work with the next generation of students?
Yeah, and Ian, you bring up a good point. I think that was a question too that kind of came through, is how do we trust that this is the future, right? As Peter explained, right? This is the new normal. And yeah, there are questions around whether or not acceptance of digital exams and the Duolingo English test in specific were a temporary measure to help with enrollment concerns and challenges, or will it live beyond? And I'll show another slide, Peter, because I think, again, sometimes graphics
Please
really do can kind of give a cleaner kind of image of the trends that we're seeing. And so when we launched back in 2016, and Peter, I'm not exactly sure when University of North Texas became a partner of Duolingo, but maybe back around here. And you can see that while we did experience kind of a spike in 2020 as a result of the pandemic, we are now today at close to 4,000 accepting programs and institutions. There was a question in the Q&A also around secondary school acceptance. While we began at an undergraduate focused intention around growing adoption and use of the exam and admission, we are increasingly welcoming institutions and programs at the secondary level, at the graduate level, and around the world. And so I think that this itself shows that we are continuing to grow acceptance of the test among institutions. And that we'll continue to see. I think for those institutions that accept it on a temporary basis, and you may see on their website that they accept it for a particular admission cycle, what we are finding is that institutions may be continuing to extend the temporary acceptance. And part of this is for good reason, right? Institutions want to collect their own reliability and validity data. And having just 1 or 2 years is not as strong as having 3 or 4 years, right? And so that is something that we are helping institutions to do, is to look at some of those predictive validity studies to ensure and to build trust in this as a tool for properly assessing English proficiency. I think one other image I think could be helpful to see is our growth in test takers. Again, you'll see that first spike back in the first section of the chart, of course, by the pandemic, and it started to dip a bit, but you'll see this gradual line of increase in the number of test takers, and we have been at our all-time high. And there's this interesting kind of cause and effect relationship, right, with test takers and institutional adoption, where institutions want to know that test takers trust this exam as a method for proving their English proficiency. And so as test takers grow, institutional adoption grows. As test takers grow, we also get more data that's feeding our artificial intelligence system. So it's all, it's kind of a win-win situation that we love to see. And so we really truly believe, and in close engagement with our institutional partners, with our agency and counseling partners, with our test takers, that we see this as a lasting tool in the admission and enrollment process.
Thanks, Lindsay. Just a slightly personal question, Lindsay, but I've known you since before you worked at Duolingo, and I was wondering, and I'd been meaning to ask you, what was it that made you want to start working for Duolingo?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So my past has been in international admission at the university level. I then shifted to working with nonprofit higher education associations and kind of that 30,000-foot view. Most recently at the National Association for College Admission Counseling, where I was introduced to the Duolingo English test in 2015 as they were getting ready to launch this product. I think I have centered my career always around access to education. And have been excited by the innovative ways in which the Duolingo English test has provided a new pathway and access and reduced barriers to education. And I think that's what still excites me. I started with the Duolingo English test last August, and the rate at which change occurs all within the mission of the organization, both Duolingo and the Duolingo English test, around lowering barriers to education really spoke to me. And I find that to be true on a daily basis. And so excited to kind of be here and now helping that many more kind of prospective students in this pipeline to education.
Thanks, Lindsay. Here's one for Peter. Peter, can you share a bit more about the admission timeline and how flexible testing has supported applications at all stages of the process? I believe that you may have addressed this in your earlier response, though. Is that about right?
Sure, but I'm happy to emphasize why it's so important for us.
Okay, thanks.
University of North Texas, no surprise, we're not Harvard. right? And so we don't have that kind of a name recognition and that kind of a stellar applicant pool, which means that some of the applicants to an institution like ours are applicants that have a number of institutions on their radar, and at some point in the recruitment cycle may hear that their primary institution they wanted to go to is unable to take them, right? At that point, these applicants, which are still really strong applicants, are looking for other institutions where they could join in. And at that point, they may then need to be able to show their English language proficiency, things like that. And this is usually a shift from where they were looking for the A-League universities in their home country. Many of the institutions in their home country just have such a limited ability to take them. An example from Banit's country, right? You have the IITs and NITs, which are fantastic engineering schools in India. But the number of seats in these schools is just very small compared to just a great amount of talent that is available in India. And so when these students learn that perhaps they were not able to get into that top institution in their home country, at that point, they start to look abroad and very quickly then need to have an English test done to qualify for admissions to a US institution. And it's in exactly that niche where the Duolingo English test comes to its own, right? Where the availability of the test online, so they don't have to go seek out a center, and then the results back in a hurry as well. That allow us then to take them in that period when they've just learned that they were not able to get into their home institution's top league of schools, but are still hugely well qualified. And we would love to take these students, and now can, through the Duolingo vehicle.
Thanks, Peter. I think it might be a good time as we get towards the end to look at the results of that last poll. And there we are, the adoption of digital English proficiency tests. I think the real takeaway there is just 10% saying that digital English tests are less accepted than they were a year ago, which I think is a surprise already. But the vast majority are saying that they are more accepted than they were a year ago, with some saying the same as a year ago. So I think that's overwhelmingly quite positive. I hope that's good for you to see, Lindsay. I have just been looking at the Q&A, and we had a very interesting one come in from Ben Waxman, who some of you might know. He's asked about, well, let me read it. Since the pandemic started, I've seen university admissions teams question the actual success of online proficiency testing for whichever provider. Do you have any data, perhaps at Duolingo English test, that suggests that students who achieve high scores with the online testing are performing as well as other enrolled students in the end? So that, that view on the student success of these students taking Duolingo English tests. And that's a question to all of you, I suppose.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear Peter's perspective, because I assume you've done kind of your own institutional research studies, and that's what we are working with institutions to do on an institution by institution level. But we're also getting ready to launch a larger predictive validity study. And so if any institutions are interested in working with our assessment research team on a larger aggregate predictive validity study, we are welcoming conversations with institutions in that regard. I work with institutions, again, through presentations and through webinars on a fairly regular basis, who are presenting their data, their student success data. So they're looking at those who submitted Duolingo English tests versus other assessments, English proficiency assessments. They're looking at first-year GPAs. They're looking at retention statistics. And there are no signs that students who have taken and submitted the Duolingo English test are not succeeding at the same rate as others. And we'd be happy to put anyone in touch with some of our institutional partners with whom have shared information with us to connect you to learn more. And I'll turn it to Peter.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, so Ben asks a really essential question, right? And of course, now with the Duolingo test being around for a few more years, we're starting to have the ability to take a little bit of a longer view and have a few years of data to look at. Now, some of these studies are still early on, but let me give you a general sense of why Lindsay's comment about that there is really not a whole lot of difference between the traditional test takers and the Duolingo test takers. And it's this: the students who join us still come from the same school systems, the same undergraduate programs around the world. And so the schools of origin have not changed. And with that, the product of those schools of origin, the level of preparedness of those students is no different than the students from before. And so this is not a different applicant pool. And with that, the retention numbers are really no different as well as they join us. So that's the basic mechanism behind this, where the Duolingo test takers are not students from different schools of origin, right? They're from the same schools, and so are the same kind of they have the same level of preparedness that the previous applicants have had.
I may ask you though, Peter, too, kind of along the same versus difference. Are you seeing different geographic diversity among applicants due to the accessibility of digital exams? Has that, because when we look at kind of where our test takers come from, right, over 12,000 cities this last year, right, far exceeding perhaps if you look at accessibility versus traditional, where students are taking the test in a test center model, it does expand opportunity, I think, and so we're seeing in some of ISEF's kind of markets that you've identified as both first tier and second tier kind of growth markets for institutions to monitor. We're seeing test taker growth in those areas.
Yeah. So, hey, how long have you got? I love this topic, right?
We've got about 8 minutes.
the challenge of diversification and reaching into other geographic markets is, of course, something very close to our heart, because that's really where we can avoid volatility. The international student mobility throughout history has had a lot of upswings and downswings from different countries. At the moment, of course, the largest pool of talent from China is to some extent restricted. And so many institutions are looking for other pools of talent. Mind you, even within our traditional markets, there are plenty of diversity targets, right? So within India, a good 1 in 3 students actually do not come from the major tier 1 cities, but come from a whole bunch of second tier cities. And so reaching into those is part of our purpose of diversification. I know an area that is of interest for Duolingo is Latin America as well, right? Latin America, just because of our positioning in Texas, close to Mexico and the neighbors to the south, is still for us an underexplored region for recruitment, quite price sensitive, needing scholarships and all of that, but also where the Duolingo test again comes into its own. I remember the anecdote of the founder of Duolingo, who actually had to struggle to get access to an English language test in his journey to become an international student in the US, right? And we still see that in a number of markets in Central and Latin America, where accessibility to testing centers is really limited. And so we're hoping as we push for diversity there, that Duolingo will be a good tool for us.
Thanks. We've just had another question come in asking about preparation materials. So whether there are preparation materials available to prepare students for taking the Duolingo exam. And Lindsay, this kind of ties in with something we spoke about before, which was test readiness versus test preparation. So I wonder, are you like other tests where there are all these guides and books available that help you to ace the test? Is that something that fits in with the world of the Duolingo English test?
Yeah, I'll answer, and then I'd love to hear Bannett's perspective as he supported students who have prepared for the test. And I'll show one additional slide, which also has the link to our resource.
And Lindsay, while you're doing that, let me just say there's another question which is related, which is, and it sounds like a fake question, but it's not. Can we get copies of sample tests for us to take ourselves to evaluate the test for purposes? So please answer that as well. If you
certainly, yes. So there are practice tests, 15-minute practice tests online, accessible to anyone. For anyone who is supporting students at the institutional level, at the counselor level, if you're interested in taking a full test, reach out and let us know, and we can provide access for you to do that. So with the launch of the new test items, all of our resources have just been updated as well, which you see here. We have a very extensive official test taker guide, which goes through each of the test item types. We have on our website a test item carousel, which breaks down each individual test item and provides tips and strategies for how to perform your best on that particular item. And then one of the critical things, and I think, again, if we talk about what makes the Duolingo English test innovative, or at least it was back in 2016 until now, when we are seeing more at home on deliveries of exams, online delivery options, but is ensuring that your space is prepared. And so we have extensive resources about making sure that you're testing at a time that is best for you, whether or not you're a late person or an early morning person, how you ensure that your space is not going to be interrupted. Someone coming in to make sure you're doing well on your test is something, again, that would be a rules violation. And so we have a lot of resources. We have a lot of student-friendly resources. Again, Bennett, you talked about as to how students want to receive information. Our YouTube videos are both done with a very kind of friendly and fun environment. And just the test taker experience is what all of what we do is centered around. And so all of our resources, and we have a student advisory board who's advising us on these things, are here. So practice tests, a full-length test is available if you'd like to reach out to us. We also, again, have all of these resources, but understand that, again, familiarization and practice towards this proficiency is needed by those who are supporting students. So Bennett, would you like to share your perspective?
Absolutely. So the test itself, most of the English proficiency tests are structured pretty similar. And when we are training students on them, and they have the 4 basic sections involved and with subsets in it. And each of the students, what we provide them is we provide them dummy test. We also provide them, practice material during the test, during the course of study. And usually this course of study ranges between 1 month to 3 months, depending on what the student is, at what level the student is, and what level he has to reach to get admission. So I like coming in with Peter's view that the students who are there as a cohort are from the same set of students, the same undergraduate schools, same graduate schools. They're preparing for similar tests, and Duolingo has been very forthcoming. We've received enough material on board. We have enough sessions with our trainers coming in. So all of those things help us as guidance counselors or trainers deliver the test in an appropriate manner. Now, very honestly, across the panel, we cannot change the basic level of English of a student, right? That's from say year 1 to say year 12 of his class or 12th grade or part of it. But what we do is we familiarize with them with the test, and we kind of put in the loopholes, the bottlenecks, the time frame he requires, how much time. Now Duolingo is a short test, so what happens is everything is packed into that 1 hour, and some students like it. They say, okay, everything is 1 hour, I just need to concentrate for 1 hour. Some students feel panicked, because it's an hour. And another thing which comes around is, there is no build up, or how do you put it? Like if you go physical test, you have to build up. Okay, tomorrow is my test. Okay, let me sleep well. let me be fresh in the morning. And usually most of the students are, waking up in the night. So the morning time is strictly for them is a strict no. That's a practical way of doing it. But they have to wake up, they change their schedule. And then somewhere in that aspect, they kind of get perturbed. The score doesn't come through. We are like, be natural at it. Or the Duolingo is very specific that I want to give. I'm a morning person. I give it in the morning. I'm an evening person. I give it in the evening. I'm an afternoon person. I want to have a nap and give it. I'm at my best. And I think that is one aspect which I think is very, very, forward thinking and in terms of, at your best. So that's how the structure of the test is.
Thanks, Bennett. Guys, we are out of time, but I do think we can run a minute or so over. If you have any closing remarks that you'd like to add before we end this webinar and wrap it up, Peter, is there anything else you wanted to add before we finish?
No, I'm encouraged by the interest from the students to really go this route. That so many students are saying yes, that we're keen to adopt this. This is the process going forward. So that's exciting to see. I agree with Lindsay. This test is here to stay. And we see that in the actions of the traditional test providers, who are now also very much challenged to put into the market new online options as well.
Thanks, Peter. Lindsay, anything to add?
Yeah, thanks. Just kind of confirming, I don't think there's any going back, and we're excited about what the future holds. And just an invitation to those who may be newer to the Duolingo English test, to working with us as we grow our engagement with all stakeholders of all types, from counselors to institutions. Welcome you reaching out to us. We'd love to learn more and love to know how we can better support you as you support students in their access to higher education or education more generally, as we saw some secondary interest too.
Thank you. And Bennett, any final remarks from you?
No, I guess, this is just you've broken a lot of barriers for accessibility and on demand. I would say this present generation of students are, I would say, kind of spoiled to the effect that everything on their time, at their convenience, at their price, So that's all we are. Peter would agree, Linda would agree with that. Somewhere, I mean, there's a huge range of choices. And in those choices, what happens is, I think this test is here to stay as more and more acceptability by universities increases, as we see that graph going to 3,800 and beyond. I think definitely more and more student interest is there because there's definite inherent advantages which this test offers vis-a-vis others, and others are emulating them. So we see that they're moving more, they're becoming faster, they're moving, it's like WES, right? They're the only ones that now they're moving in their speed. So that's how this whole dynamism in the industry of English proficiency is shifting.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Bennett, and thank you to the panel so much for sharing your expertise. Thank you for everyone who came and joined us today. Please don't forget that you can learn much more about digital English testing and everything else related to international student mobility over on icefmonitor.com. But for now, thanks again for joining us, and we wish you an excellent rest of your day wherever you are, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.